Dear church, let's talk about church relations with Thomas Southerland.
Dear church, let's talk Holy Spirit,
Transformation,
prayer.
6 days, right?
And if you love me, you will keep my commandments.
Our culture wants to define you by your sexuality. We know that our identity is found in Christ.
Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. As always, I'm your host, Chris McCurley. Joined in studio today, we oftentimes have Zoom guests, but you're here with us today. Thomas Southerland is a good friend of mine, a colleague, preacher in Charlotte, Tennessee. And for those who don't know geography, Dixon, Tennessee is about 30 minutes west of Nashville, and Charlotte is about 7 miles north of Dixon, where I live, and the community where you live and preach, and you're with the Water Street Church of Christ in Charlotte. Great congregation. Been there to speak a time or so, and love the people there. Great church. Great having you on. Thanks for being with us today.
Man, I appreciate you letting me be here. We're a little bitty congregation, and I said little bitty
No, it's growing.
It's growing. It's kind of medium sized, I guess you would say. But we appreciate you coming down and doing some of our Wednesday night series, and that's really encouraging for the folks there too.
Oh, it's a great church and a neat building. You know, it's an older building. It's got a little balcony and everything.
It's built in 1914.
Yeah. Really a neat, when I moved here from Texas, I realized just how new Texas is, because so many things here in Tennessee are old, and there's so much history here, even with the church buildings like Walnut Street here and then at Charlotte also. How long have you been preaching there?
I've been there 8 years.
Okay.
So my grandmother actually taught at this congregation. She died before I was ever born.
Wow.
And I never went to that congregation except visiting a couple times with my friends.
Okay.
But so many of the people there know my family better than I know my family. Some of them have died before I was ever born. But it's really interesting. But I've been there 8 years. We've got some really good leadership and some really good folks there.
Yeah, it's one thing about Middle Tennessee, especially Dixon, which is about 16,000 folks in city, and then Charlotte, which 1,500 probably.
I'm
new there, so
and I'm not sure that the numbers are even right. So we'll go with 1,500. Yeah.
We'll say that's how. I think there are 55,000 in the county, right, Dixon County, but everybody is related to everybody. And there are a lot of Southerlands. And a lot of them, they go to church here.
Yeah.
And so, your name is pretty prominent in this area, and you're probably related to most, if not all of them.
Yeah.
But tell us how it came about that you became the preacher there at Water Street.
Well, I had been working my regular job for 20-something years, and I had never set out to be just a full-time minister.
Yeah.
But the little congregation I was attending at the time, our minister he got a job in Illinois. And so we were taking turns with a few people preaching. Mm-hmm. And a couple of the guys that were doing that ended up not being able to do it because of health reasons.
So it fell on you.
Yes. So I ended up preaching for 9 years there. And then Mr. Robert Cullum, he was one of those guys that was just a prominent member of this community. He was the preacher there for just a few months shy of 50 years.
Wow.
And he passed away unexpectedly. And they were on the search for a preacher. I wasn't really looking for anything, but somehow my name got dropped in there, and they came and talked to me. I wasn't necessarily looking for it, but it just worked. And I went and filled in a couple of times. We kind of fell in love with the people over there.
Yeah.
And I've been there ever since. And so they'll run me off one of these days, but we really enjoy being there.
Yeah, I know they're glad to have you. Are you still doing that other job you said that you mentioned, or are you now full-time?
No, now I'm full-time in the ministry. So when we had about 30 people, that was one thing. I was working and taking care of my dad. I had a couple kids in diapers.
Yeah.
And when I moved to Water Street, at the time we were about 190 people. Yeah. And it was just, I was stretched way too thin. I was missing too many things. Yeah. And so I've been doing that for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now exclusively.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's going well, as we said, growing. How many on a Sunday morning now?
We had 193 there this Sunday.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And it wasn't quite that when you got there.
Well, it actually was. We had COVID, and we kind of slid back a little from COVID. Sure. And it's been, things have been, we've had a broader span, a broader range since COVID, but things are starting to kind of get clicking again. Even, it's been a while.
It has been a while.
It just seemed like it took a long time for those waves to stabilize.
You're right. It seems like we have not bounced back as quickly as you'd want to.
Yeah.
I wanted to have you on today to talk about what I love about this community is the churches all seem to get along. They all seem to have good relationships. We get together as much as we can.
Yeah.
We'd like to get together more than we have, but we've had Matthew Hyde on here, who's at Burns, a little community outside of Dixon, and then you're in Charlotte, and there's other congregations that are more rural, out in the woods, so to speak. What I love about this community is the church relations, and I see so many churches in different communities and talk to preachers. They talk about, it's just a competition, and it seems like it's so competitive, and preachers can get territorial. And talk a little bit about what you think makes this work. How is it that the churches in this area get along so well and just seem to have a good relationship?
Well, we do. And so the idea of, competing is a little foreign to me. It's a little hard to understand because we've got so many congregations that get along together well. But I don't think that sectioning off or having, feeling like we've got a team over there versus this team over here is an artifact of the church necessarily as it is. That's just kind of how people are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we have that type of attitude with the church, we're missing the point.
Yeah.
Because Jesus Christ is the thing that holds us all together. And so you think about the New Testament church in the first century, they've got Jews and Gentiles, and they were struggling with that a little bit. And it seems silly to us. We think, well, Jew, Gentile, what's the big deal? At the same time, if we're struggling with the same thing today, maybe we can take some of those lessons and apply it.
Yeah.
So I don't know that there is a one-size-fit-all scenario for a lot of these different issues, but there's a one-size-fit-all fix, and that's being one in Jesus Christ. There shouldn't be any divisions among us. Christ is not divided. And when we start to understand that's the one thing that links us all together, we've got one hope. There's one church. There's one Lord. There's one faith. That's that understanding should trump everything else.
I agree with you. Seeing the bigger picture, right?
Yeah.
And I've often asked myself, am I trying to grow the kingdom of Walnut Street or God's kingdom, right?
Yes. We can get into that mentality because the kingdom's bigger than the county.
Right.
But we look at our little local section and we think, well, that's the kingdom of God. And it is. But we can't get into that trap of thinking that that's all there is to it. We are members of one another. And if you've done any mission work or have had any outreach into the mission field, there are people on the other side of the world that are just as much a part of kingdom as we are. And I've even seen, some congregations that maybe are too involved with a congregation that they have helped out and they feel like it's an extension of their team or whatever.
Yes.
And it's not. You're thinking too small. The kingdom is much bigger than that.
I like how you said that. You're thinking too small. And that's something that, when we got together, especially when I first moved here, me and you and Matthew, we talked about this. And I think it's important to be happy for someone that, I hear people say sometimes, hey, so-and-so, they're not coming to Walnut Street anymore. They're going to Water Street. And it's like, well, that's okay.
Yeah,
I hope we didn't run them off, right? I hope I didn't do something. But at the same time, they're still a part of the kingdom. They're still a Christian that is dedicated to the Lord's church. It's just in a different location, and we've got to be okay with that, right?
Yes, I think so. The old saying, stealing sheep,
Swapping sheep. Yeah.
Things change and family dynamics change. You may have kids that grow up and get married, and they move to a different location in the county and start attending there.
Yeah.
Well, when they start having kids, grandma and grandma may want to be with their grandchildren.
Right.
And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with those things. So we need to, maybe be a little less territorial about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think also something that you and I and Matthew have talked about is if someone does leave one of our congregations and goes over to one of our other ones, being open and honest to say, hey, this person had some issues.
Yes.
With us. And so you might want to address these eventually, or this is why they left and it wasn't under good terms. And, hopefully you can help them work through that. I think that's important too, so that people don't feel like that just changing locations fixes their problems or their issues. Sometimes we can run away from our problems and go get a fresh start somewhere else, but those problems are still there and they need to be dealt with.
Right? Yeah, you don't want to have somebody come into a congregation with a grudge against somebody or something else in a different congregation, different group of Christians. Don't fall into that with them.
Right.
They need to see you loving them, loving both parties.
Yeah.
So yes, there can be issues, but yeah, you need to love one another, and that can help heal them a little bit for whatever hurt feelings there are.
Yeah, absolutely.
In its 9th year, the Quarterly is, according to several readers, the best magazine in the Brotherhood. Featuring a wide range of writers and topics, the Quarterly is a fantastic mix of encouragement, edification, education, and enjoyment. The latest issue features both sides of the calling in the church building debate. A detailed look at the events while Jesus was in the womb, the work of the Holy Spirit in the life of a Christian, a formerly classified FBI article examining how Moses and Joshua used spies and what principles can be gleaned from it. And that's just barely scraping the surface. Digital subscriptions are free, and the print subscription costs less than a family trip to McDonald's. To subscribe or download previous issues, just go to cobbpublishing.com/quarterly.
What do you think that churches can do to strengthen their bond? I know we get together as much as possible, but and I think that's a great thing. What else can churches do?
Well, it's a challenging question because we have responsibilities within our own congregation.
Yeah.
And I think the old-fashioned stuff, gospel meetings, we talk about gospel meetings are kind of outdated. All we do is different congregations come and visit. Well, that's huge. Yeah. Sometimes that's the only time we get to say. That can be a good thing. Yeah. So I think that's good. The singings that we have in that interaction, it gives us some of those extra worship times to interact with one another. Yeah. I know some Christians that I admire very much and some that have passed on, but I never sat through a Sunday morning worship service with them. It was always a singing or a gospel meeting because that's the time when we got to interact with them. But even further than that, you have places like the Nashville School of Preaching, and you have teaching ministries that happen at certain congregations that are overseen by elders. And I mean, I'm part of those as well. I get to go and benefit from some of the work that eldership is putting on, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, those are good things. I tend to be one that looks at what can we do different and new, and sometimes just going back to the old. And
just the opposite. I'm old fashioned.
Yeah, you're the retro guy, and I'm the one trying to push it forward. And I think there's probably a balance there, and I could learn from, because you do have to understand your culture and your community. And this is a community that is close knit. Yes. And like I said, everybody's related. Don't talk about anybody because, you're probably talking about the relative. And I think it's important to remember that, maybe they don't want to move away from things like you want to. And again, whether it's outdated or not, the getting together principle, however you do that is excellent.
Yeah. Technology has helped with that a little bit with the ability to do Zoom meetings and Facebook and stuff like that, I guess. But I tried to think of maybe some ways, what's the new way to do it? I always go back to the old stuff.
Yeah.
And that's not the only way to do things, but that's why we need guys like you as well that are always on the cutting edge of that type of thinking.
Well, it's your culture at your church too. If Water Street doesn't want to do some of those things, or Walnut Street, whoever it is, then you just kind of
but not when you look at change or maybe having to do things different, a lot of times people don't want to change, but we need to change in some ways. So that's why you have to have that new element of it too.
I tell people all the time, that's where I believe in evolution, is when it comes to evolving and adapting and adjusting and doing new things from here and there. But sometimes the old ways work as well. Yeah. Do you think, and this is a delicate topic in question, but do you think that maybe, not necessarily here in this community, although it could apply, but in a lot of places, I tend to think sometimes that maybe we have too many churches, that, we're so spread out, and you have, a little congregation of 8 here that have been functioning without elders for years that are down to one service. And then over here, 2 miles down the road, you have, 10 members here. And it's like, could we benefit from closing some of these churches and coming together? And do you think maybe the problem sometimes is we're too scattered out and we're too separated, and that maybe it's time to close some churches and come together?
Yes. We've spread ourselves too thin. And I don't say this lightly because I've spent months on end crying and pouring my heart out over these issues.
Yeah.
My wife comes from a congregation that is very near and dear to our hearts, and it's off the beaten path.
Yeah.
And back in the day, people would walk to that church.
Yeah.
Well, now it's a 3.5-minute ride to a larger congregation. And so sometimes people get offended. Well, our kids are leaving our small little church and they're going over here to the big church. Well, those kids need interaction and they need classes. And one of the things that's hard to see is when you come out of that and you go to maybe a larger congregation, people will say, wow, I needed that interaction with other Christians.
Yeah.
And we don't know how much we're missing. We get tied to the community, to the building, and to the small location, and it can hold us back. There are Christians that have, for instance, I think of one lady that lived across the road from this little congregation, and she was in her 90s, and she had walked across the street to that church building. Well, it needs to be there for her.
Yeah.
And when she passes, things may be different. So that's a hard conversation to have. But yes, there is benefit to that. We do spread ourselves too thin. And when we get to the point where we have small congregations that don't have elders, that's not a today, tomorrow, next week fix. That is a generational fix.
Sure.
And our communities have changed. They've gotten a little bigger. And it's okay if we decide to merge some congregations. And it's okay if they want to stay there. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's just a reality that we have to face. And it's kind of gut-wrenching too. But let's not get so tied to a building.
Yeah.
And a place, a certain pew where we've sat for so long that we lose sight of what the kingdom is. It's bigger than that.
And I think that's really where this discussion lands, is that it's not about you. We say that all the time here. It's not about you. And that it's about something bigger, because in relation to the smaller churches and things like that, man, I get it. There's nostalgia there.
I do too.
Great granddaddy built that building, whatever, whatever the ins and outs of it may be. I've been here my whole life.
Yes.
The sentimentality of it is just hard to let go of. But understanding, like you just said, it's bigger than buildings. It's bigger than just, the pew that you've sat at forever, which is important. That's a big deal. And it's easy for somebody, to come in and say, hey, just rip the Band-Aid off, close the doors and go on. That's easy to say, hard to do. But at the end of the day, what's the bigger picture here?
We can get even to the point where we look at our future only in terms of the local congregation. So we always say we're raising up the next generation of leaders, elders, and deacons.
Yeah.
And we really are.
Yeah.
But a few months ago, I went back and I just started writing down names, and I did so for a couple of weeks, of youth groups that I was a part of. Some, when I was, youth groups span a big range.
Right.
But my brothers, who are a decade older than me, were part of a youth group, and I named everyone that I could remember in that youth group. And it was amazing, under the good leadership of that congregation, how many elders and deacons and preachers and wives of such that are there, teachers, missionaries, that turned out faithful Christians to this day for the ones that I could track down. It was absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
But the one thing that surprised me, almost none of them were at the original congregation.
There you go. Yeah.
And you know what? We can't strive to preserve just this little community or this little church building. The kingdom is bigger than that. I'll give you a good example. We've got a young man that's studying at Faulkner right now to be a minister.
Okay.
And everybody's excited. I mean, this guy's 18. He just graduated. Oh, he's going to be a minister. Boy, wouldn't it be great if we had him as our youth minister here, man? And then by the time they're ready to kick me out the door, we could have him as the new minister there. Isn't that wonderful? Big plans. First off, don't lay that on him. That's too much pressure.
It's a great point.
However, God may not use him here.
Yep.
God may use him a long way off, and we ought to be fine with that. And we still need to be doing our job with raising that new generations of leaders and realizing maybe they won't be right here.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll go somewhere else.
Send them out and make a difference. And you're right. I think we get locked into our own little silo or in our bubble and not realizing sometimes that, man, we're not only in the Bible Belt, we're on the buckle of the Bible Belt here.
Yes.
And there's so many places in just these United States that you don't have a church 2 or 3 miles apart, every 2 or 3 miles apart, that, there may not be even a church in that state necessarily. And so wouldn't it be great if they, hailed from Charlotte or Dixon, Tennessee, and ended up starting a church way out in Montana or Idaho or somewhere like that, or maybe in Northeast where there's not a lot of churches. I mean, I think you're right.
The kingdom, the greatness of the kingdom, it transcends all of those boundaries. And that's neat. Brother Robert Cullum, who was the preacher at Water Street before I was there, was there for nearly 50 years.
Yeah.
And he had that type of influence. I had a lady that called me from Oklahoma one time, and she wanted to do a Bible study. And I thought, well, I don't know how I can do a Bible study with her in Oklahoma. Right. And so I ended up calling a little church that was out there within a mile from her.
Yeah.
And the guy said, okay, yeah. And he was going to reach out to her, talk to her, actually knew who she was. He said, where are you at? And I said, a little town in Charlotte, Tennessee. He said, oh, Brother Robert Cullum. I loved him. He was my best friend. That's what everybody says about Robert Cullum, that he was their best friend.
Yeah.
And so here's somebody states away that had a relationship. And we need to remember that in the New Testament church, they communicated too.
Yeah.
You have the Galatian churches that communicated. They circulated letters. There was communication between these churches.
Crowley's Ridge College, located in Paragould, Arkansas, invites you to their 24th annual Bible Lectureship Series, April 13th through 16th, as they observe the prophet Hosea. Dr. Carl Williamson kicks things off with the keynote lecture on Sunday, April 13th, beginning at 6 p.m., followed by a number of remarkable speakers that represent various churches across the Southeast United States and many Christian institutions. You can visit crc.edu/lectureship for more information, as well as a full speaker schedule. The Division of Bible at CRC says that this study of Hosea, titled Like a Morning Cloud, is designed to encourage and remind the church that God loves us and is willing to do anything to see us in His fellowship. Like a Morning Cloud, April 13th through 16th on the beautiful campus of Crowley's Ridge College and online at youtube.com/@CRC Pioneers.
Yeah, and I think that's the big key is, realizing that there's something bigger out there and keeping communication open and trying to do things together. And, the kingdom is more powerful and more dynamic and can make more of an impact if we all work together rather than staying closed off and not being territorial. And I think, when it comes to church relations, how can we come together and combine forces to reach as many people as possible, instead of how can I stay locked inside my own little world here and bring people in, grow our people, and that be about it. How can we work together and join forces to make an impact in this county and beyond?
I like to see our youth get together on different levels.
Mm-hmm.
And so we may do camps together with different people in different counties. We may have area-wide youth devotionals, and I like being able to do that. And there may be speakers at different places. So I like that as well. But I like the idea of our kids getting together with those Christian colleges and dealing with people on a broader scale.
Yes.
And that's where you get introduced to, people from different areas. And that's where people get solicited to go and work in different parts of the world for the kingdom of God. So I think you just got to have a personal interaction.
You do.
And to have a personal interaction, you've got to get into a bigger group of people.
Yep.
That's uncomfortable. That's not me, man. I can sit over here by myself and be okay. Sometimes we got to push ourselves towards that.
We do. And let's face it, as the pulpit preacher, we have a real opportunity to kind of steer the ship on this, right?
Yes.
When I was coaching, I always felt like the team kind of takes on the personality of the coach. So if you're yelling and screaming all the time, they're eventually going to be that way. Or if you're calmer or, more deliberate and intentional about things and not flying off the handle all the time, they're probably going to take on that personality as well. And so if we're getting in the pulpit and we're constantly preaching how much better it is to be a part of this congregation versus another, or if we're standing up there and saying, this is really the only real choice in town, and sometimes that may be the option, I don't know. But if we're preaching to, the silo mentality, then, we're never going to get to where we need to be in all of this that we're talking about.
You're right. And we've got a line to walk there, because we don't want to preach, a Burger King religion. You just have it your way. Go be the religious consumer. That's not what we're saying at all. We're actually looking and saying, maybe that this congregation will suit what you need better because they're better equipped to handle these certain things. And I've had that interaction with folks before who maybe came and they were baptized at Water Street, but there was a better fit or a better class. They were getting the encouragement they needed, maybe here at Walnut Street. And that's wonderful. I'm glad. I'm grateful for those things. We can feel each other's. There's things that a small church can do that a big church can't.
Yeah.
Things that a big church can do that a small church can. And so we can complement each other in those things and still retain autonomy. And I think that's maybe a direction to look at.
Yeah, because I think it's easy, and I know I can feel this way as a preacher, and probably you can as well. It's easy when somebody leaves and goes somewhere else to think, okay, what did I do wrong? Or you hear them say, well, we went over here because they had a singles class, or they had a divorce care class, or they had something that you're not offering. You think, well, maybe we should offer that, or and I think, no, maybe it's good that, they found their niche somewhere else, or they found something that they needed there. And, we don't all have to offer everything the same. If there's a group dynamic there that is more beneficial to them because that fits where they're at in life, I think that's a good thing. But again, it goes back to that, well, are we not good enough for you and all that?
Yes. Well, how about giving somebody a call and saying, hey, we've got a couple that may be coming over there.
Yeah.
And have a look out for them.
Yeah.
Or I've had people do the same thing with us. Steve's great about that type of thing. And that helps. I had a couple that moved to Arizona, and it was just a matter of picking up the phone, and they said they were going to attend there, and just being able to pick up the phone and call a couple of congregations and say, hey, if you see this person, say hi. Turns out they showed up in one of those congregations. And somebody was expecting them. I don't want people to feel like we're spying on them or whatever, but hey, we can encourage them in those moves.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing to know, that they don't feel like they have left a congregation and burnt bridges.
Right.
They're still our brothers.
We're still family.
Yes.
And I think that's what gets lost in this sometimes is we're still family. You didn't become less of a Christian because you left us and went somewhere else. Or you took your membership to another congregation that's down the road or whatever. You're still a family. Again, think bigger. And the bigger picture is, the kingdom of God, not the kingdom of Walnut Street or Water Street.
I've been the beneficiary of that. My parents divorced when I was about 11 years old. Both were Christians, and we went to church every time the doors were open in there. And that's just a testament to things can go wrong with anybody, I guess.
Yeah.
But when mom and dad divorced, now we had to deal with, okay, where do we attend services at?
Right.
Well, when we're with mom, we attend here, and dad ended up going to a different congregation.
Yeah.
It would be difficult, or it would have been difficult for them to sit side by side or opposite ends of the pew or different sides of the room. It would have been chaos. And so it was a good thing to have two supportive congregations in there. And I'm not advocating for divorce at all. I condemn it, and I've had to live through it. It's no fun.
Me too.
But man, that was a good opportunity for people that they loved me, and I got to love different people, and they saw the difference, and they saw the ugliness, and they saw the divorce, and they loved us anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we needed those two congregations.
I think that's great. And I think it's important that folks understand, and I think they do, but no congregation is perfect.
Yeah.
So if you're leaving one because you want to find that more perfect one down the road, or, you hear it sometimes, somebody comes back from vacation and said, oh, if we'd just be like this church, they're doing everything right over there.
Oh, yeah.
No, they've got their problems too. You saw them on a good Sunday, but you stay there and you'll see they've got issues like everybody else. We're a family where you have people, you have problems, but instead of running from those problems, dig in and help as much as you can. Sometimes you have to dismount a dead horse. I get it, but dig in and help as much as you can, right?
I think so. And just being aware of other congregations and how things are going and what's being done in the kingdom, it can help you look at maybe some of the things that are wrong in our congregation. Yeah. It gives us a little bit better perspective of maybe we could be doing better at evangelism. Maybe we could be doing a little bit better at, really developing our new converts or something like that.
Yeah, I think, so many times when we're looking for a church home, we've got a list, kind of like a grocery list, and you're shopping.
Yeah.
And, do they have a dynamic youth group?
Do they have a playground, gym, whatever? Sometimes it can be very superficial, sometimes not so much. Had a gentleman who watches this podcast asking, they're looking for a church on what should they be looking for. And one of the things that I've mentioned several times to others is we don't always approach it from, hey, what void can I fill at this congregation?
Mm-hmm.
Can I help this congregation in some way, shape, or form? Do I have something to offer? Typically, it's the other way around. What can they do for me?
Yeah.
And to a degree, you understand that. But flipping the script a little bit and saying, okay, so what can I bring to this congregation? How can I help it? Can they help me grow? Are they going to hold the Bible at highest esteem? I mean, those are obvious,
Yes.
Check marks that you have to, have. But, what can I do?
We had a young couple that moved into the area, and they were here for about 5 years, and then they ended up moving back to some of his family's place. But it was a couple, and they had 3 or 4 kids. And when they moved in there, all of a sudden, we had a youth group, but it was a certain age,
Yeah.
big age range with youth groups, all the way up into the college age. But they had younger kids, and these 3 or 4 kids were there every Sunday, along with 3 or 4 from other families. And all of a sudden, our front rows were filled with little boys and little girls in that age range. And a lot of it was just due to them. They were good and they were consistent Christians. They were there every time the doors were open. They lived it in their lives. They had a huge impact on transforming our little youth group from, kind of a high school, junior high age kids. And all of a sudden we look around and we're like, we've got a huge crop. Where did this come from? And that's just an example of how God can give some increase. Yeah, it's like you don't even see it coming. And all of a sudden, here it is.
That's incredible.
And that's wonderful. That couple has since, they have moved back to some of where his family was from, but the impact stayed.
Yeah.
And wow, man, God can do some neat stuff, can he? If we're willing to go and do. And that's exactly what they did. They kind of filled that little void that we didn't even know we were missing.
Yeah, isn't that great?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thomas, thank you for being on today.
Man, I appreciate you having
great
me
conversation. I enjoy our friendship. I'm so glad that you're in Charlotte at the Water Street Church. I know y'all are just really doing well. And, I'd encourage folks who are traveling, stop in and see me. I live in Charlotte. You can stop and see me, but definitely go to the Water Street Church of Christ on a Sunday and visit Thomas and meet the great people there. I want to tell you, if you have a question about today's episode, you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. If you have a specific question for Thomas, we'll forward it to him. I'm sure he'd be willing to answer any question that you might have. Just thank you, Thomas, for being here again, and I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule.
Appreciate you inviting me, Chris. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank everyone for tuning in. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.